Então, muito boa tarde a todos e a todas que estão a assistir a esta, digamos, conferência inaugural deste seminário. Relativamente ao dia de hoje, nós vamos ter aqui algumas participações, nomeadamente da equipa de projeto, mas também de duas keynote speakers que irão falar, como é óbvio, em língua inglesa. Por isso pedimos desculpa, mas vamos ter assim uma parte, digamos, e uma composição um bocadinho híbrida. Vamos tentar falar um bocadinho em português e inglês, mas depois, quando passarmos à parte das comunicações das keynote speakers, vai ter que ser toda essa parte em inglês, incluindo as questões que queiram colocar também às keynote speakers. Eu gostaria então de agradecer a todos a presença, agradecer também à professora Teresa Patrício, que irei já dar a palavra para fazer esta abertura. Infelizmente não podemos contar com a representação da Reitoria do ESCte, mas amanhã sim, uma das reitoras estará na abertura. Chama a atenção que amanhã temos um dia muito forte e um dia, obviamente, com múltiplas apresentações, que serão todas em português, embora a nossa colega Teresa Sordé, que também está aqui hoje, ela vai fazer depois um comentário no final da manhã e vai, obviamente, falar em castelhano nesse comentário. Mas só para dizer que temos aqui, obviamente, formatos muito diferentes e aqui uma composição muito diferente. Então vou começar de forma mais formal, por dizer que este seminário é o seminário de apresentação dos resultados deste projeto de investigação, que já tem mais de 3 anos de duração, que é o projeto de Desempenhos escolares entre Ciganos, Investigação-ação e projeto de co-design. E este projeto é um projeto que obviamente tem duas componentes, uma componente mais investigativa e depois uma componente mais de pesquisa colaborativa e também participativa, e hoje iremos falar um bocadinho sobre precisamente as estratégias participativas que nós implementamos no projeto. Mas fazendo assim, agora então a abertura mais propriamente dita e em termos formais, vou dar agora a palavra à professora Teresa Patrício, que é professora associada no ESCte, nas áreas da Sociologia e Políticas Públicas e diretora também do Centro de Investigação e Estudos de Sociologia, desenvolve investigação na área de Estudos Sociais da Ciência e sobre as políticas de ciência, tecnologia e ensino superior. Agora vou passar um bocadinho à parte em inglês e já dou a palavra à professora, peço desculpa. Good afternoon to all people that are present in this session, and this is the first and opening seminar of our project, that the title is Educational Achievements Among Cigan People, Research Action and Co-Design Project. And in this afternoon, we are very pleased to introduce our keynote speakers in the last part of this session, that is Margaret Greenfield and Teresa Sordé Marti. But now, in this first part, we have with us Professora Teresa Patrício. She's Associate Professor at ESCte, Lisbon University Institute, in the areas of sociology and public policy, and she's the director of the Center for Research and Studies in Sociology, CIES. She carries out research in the field of social studies of science and on the policies of science, technology and higher education. Obrigada, professora Teresa, por estar cá conosco hoje. Muito obrigada. Eu passo a palavra.
Boa tarde, estão-me a ouvir?
Tá. Sim, estamos a ouvir perfeitamente.
Espera aí. Só um minuto. Peço desculpa.
Tudo bem.
É o telefone a tocar. Muito obrigada por essas palavras muito amáveis. Boa tarde a todos e todas e bem-vindos a este seminário um seminário internacional sobre o desempenhos escolares entre os ciganos, investigação-ação e projeto de co-design, que é organizado no âmbito do CIES, que é o Centro de Investigação e Estudos de Sociologia. É um enorme prazer para mim estar aqui hoje e participar nesta abertura desta conferência. As minhas primeiras palavras são para as coordenadoras do projeto de investigação com o mesmo título e as organizadoras deste encontro. Portanto, gostava de felicitar a Manuela Mendes e a Olga Magano pela coordenação e co-coordenação do projeto, financiado pela FCT, e pela organização deste encontro, que permite dar-nos uma oportunidade de conhecer, aprender e discutir o trabalho produzido durante a tarde de hoje e o dia da manhã. Quero também saudar a equipa de investigação e todos aqueles que contribuíram para promover este encontro. A very special welcome to our two keynote speakers, Margaret Greenfield and Teresa Martin. It is a pleasure to have you with us here and to hear your contributions to this seminar on a very relevant and timely topic. The project of educational achievements among Cigano people develops within the traditions of some of the best practices developed within CIES. It contributes to the development of action research, which is the process of taking action and doing research, allowing the identification, the understanding of the trajectories of Cigano students that are attending secondary school and in many metropolitan areas, as well as permitting and adapting curriculums so that students can successfully complete secondary education. It also permits the development of strategies for future contributions for the development and the intervention of public policies. It is a project which is developed within CIES and is a clear contribution to both basic research and applied research, and permitting the articulation of different relations for scientific knowledge. CIES é centro grande de investigação, mas centro coeso que desenvolve na área das ciências sociais, áreas de sociologia, políticas públicas, ciência política, ciências da comunicação, história moderna e contemporânea e serviço social. Neste grande, mas coeso centro de investigação, I would like to refer two aspects of our work in CIES that are highlighted in this project. Primeiro, the first one is CIES is dedicated to the study of contemporary social problems. Problems como exclusivity, mobility, school failure or school dropout rates, which can often reach alarming rates. Problems such as segregation, discrimination, minority integration, studies of identity, community, culture. All these are topics which are extremely relevant and addressing pressing problems of our society today, not only in the national terms, but also within Europe and in the world. The second aspect which CIES is also dedicated to is the competencies and experiences articulated between basic research and a research that is oriented to public policies and areas of intervention in different sectors of society. At CIES, we develop projects, basic research projects that are financed and evaluated by peer review, promote scientific collaborations and publications. But at the same time, we also develop applied research and activities of knowledge transfer, where we promote the relationship between science and society. And we do so with the participation of youth, students, representatives from different institutions, representatives from school groupings, teachers, and even from employment centers. This science-society relationship has various facets, but I would say that the most important is the interaction between science and society with the public. And the way we promote that in terms of achieving a collaborative, inclusive, participatory relationship is a challenge for all of us who work in research and for all of those who want to produce new knowledge. O projeto Desempenhos Escolares entre os Ciganos mostra estes dois aspectos que eu aqui referi. Estudo de problemas sociais contemporâneos e a articulação entre investigação fundamental e investigação aplicada, contribuindo para encontrar soluções na área do ensino, da educação e contribuindo para as políticas públicas na educação. Acrescento ainda aqui um contributo para os estudos comparativos numa perspectiva mais ampla, mesmo internacional. Por último, o trabalho sobre os desempenhos escolares entre os ciganos indica claramente aquilo que é um crescente interesse sobre este tema, que tem vindo a atrair a atenção dos investigadores, mas também o crescente interesse da sociedade por este tema, o que faz antever o crescimento e o desenvolvimento de futuras redes de colaboração, de parcerias, não só a nível nacional, mas europeu e internacional, vindo a integrar entidades públicas e privadas de diferentes setores da sociedade. Este projeto e este seminário estabelece as bases para futuras colaborações entre parceiros, contribuindo para novo conhecimento, com propostas para futuras atividades de formação e formas de intervenção melhor adequadas para obter os resultados desejados na resolução dos problemas sociais e na promoção da formação, da credencialização e da educação para mais cidadania, mais igualdade e mais oportunidades. Muito obrigada. Desejo a todos um excelente seminário nestes próximos 2 dias.
Muito obrigada, professora Teresa e Patrício, pelas suas palavras que são muito estimulantes e que demonstram muito bem o cariz e a natureza deste projeto de investigação. Então, se calhar passaríamos aqui a uma rápida apresentação sobre o projeto de investigação. Vou aqui só partilhar a tela, é só um segundo, peço desculpa. Só precisava de saber se estão a visualizar a tela, se estão a ver o PowerPoint, peço desculpa.
Agora não.
Agora não, pois.
Manuela, estávamos a dar-te para trás, penso eu.
Okay. E agora estão a ver?
Sim, estamos.
Okay, pronto. Então, vou só então começar. Relativamente então a este projeto, hoje esta sessão servirá apenas para fazer aqui uma pequena apresentação sobre as várias fases metodológicas do projeto e depois, mais daqui a pouco, a minha colega Olga Magano irá falar precisamente mais das metodologias de caráter participativo que nós usamos aqui neste projeto. Bom, relativamente à origem deste projeto, é importante dizer que este projeto tem origem num projeto anterior que nós desenvolvemos, entre 2013 e 2015, também um projeto financiado pela Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia, cujo título é Fatores-chave para o sucesso e continuidade dos percursos escolares ciganos, indivíduos, famílias e políticas públicas. Este projeto, no fundo, os seus resultados fundamentaram em grande medida a elaboração deste projeto que nós ainda temos em curso e que está em fase de finalização. Na verdade, este específico projeto do FCT que nós levamos a efeito entre 2013 e 2015, e depois um outro projeto, que é o Estudo Nacional sobre as Comunidades Ciganas, conseguimos perceber, obviamente, através de alguns dados que recolhemos, embora, como saibam, em Portugal temos limitações ao nível da recolha de estatísticas étnicas, mas foi possível, no âmbito da Estratégia Nacional para as Comunidades Ciganas, levar a efeito esse estudo, e foi possível também lançar um inquérito questionário a 1.599 pessoas de origem cigana e também alguns familiares. Ou seja, aos grupos familiares, para além de termos caracterizado, no fundo, estes inquiridos, foi possível também caracterizar de algum modo também os grupos familiares, mas foi possível atestar que apenas 2,5% das pessoas inquiridas, e nós tivemos a preocupação de abranger todos os municípios do território continental, mas 2,5%, como estava a dizer, detinham apenas o ensino secundário ou superior. Mais recentemente, a DGIC, a Direção-Geral de Estatísticas de Educação e Ensino Superior, também no âmbito da Estratégia Nacional para as Comunidades Ciganas, normalmente também produz alguns dados importantes relativamente à frequência e ao sucesso e insucesso dos jovens e das crianças ciganas, e também foi possível verificar que cerca de 2,6% da população escolar a população obviamente cigana, está no ensino secundário, ou seja, há aqui uma baixa percentagem de pessoas de origem cigana que frequentam este nível de ensino, por comparação, obviamente, com os outros níveis de ensino. Ou seja, Portugal, à semelhança de outros países da União Europeia, continua ainda a registrar baixos níveis de escolaridade entre a população cigana, apesar dos últimos avanços registados, principalmente nos últimos 5 anos até à atual data. Também encontramos alguns índices elevados, obviamente, de insucesso e abandono escolar, mas, obviamente, aquilo que nos preocupa é precisamente esta baixa escolaridade que ainda subsiste entre os ciganos portugueses. É óbvio que não estamos a falar de uma situação que é singular apenas à realidade portuguesa. Obviamente que noutros países da União Europeia esta realidade também subsiste, embora haja diversidade de situações, obviamente, mas de uma forma geral é uma realidade e uma tendência, digamos, que está bem patente, digamos, nos países da União Europeia. Esta situação deriva mais de desigualdades estruturais, a nosso ver, do que propriamente falta de competências das famílias ou devido eventualmente a questões ditas culturais, ou insuficiências ou características ou indiciocracias de caráter cultural ou até associadas também ao capital, digamos, ao capital étnico. Ou seja, por outras palavras, aquilo que nos foi revelado nos estudos anteriores foi que, de facto, há, obviamente, jovens e crianças ciganas que cumprem o primeiro ciclo, o segundo, obviamente que nas transições de ciclo também encontramos um elevado índice de insucesso, principalmente nas transições. Até ao terceiro ciclo também encontramos, obviamente, uma presença ainda interessante de jovens ciganos, mas depois, quando obviamente entramos no ensino secundário, há ali, digamos, um gap muito, muito importante e muito visível. No estudo da FCT anterior, 2013-15, tal estudo de fatores-chave, que é um estudo mais qualitativo, também verificamos que, por exemplo, entre os adultos com que nós falamos, nas 2 áreas metropolitanas de Lisboa e Porto, nós verificamos que não havia casos de continuidade escolar até o 12º ano, ou seja, a maior parte das pessoas não faziam propriamente um percurso regular, mas sim obviamente que iam, de certo modo, negociando o seu percurso, utilizando aqui várias ofertas educativas ou formativas que iam, obviamente, aparecendo ao longo do seu percurso, que nunca era um percurso, obviamente, muito linear. Neste contexto, desenhamos então este projeto, mais centrado precisamente nas trajetórias escolares dos estudantes do ensino secundário, e estes são os dois grandes objetivos, no fundo, do projeto. Temos, obviamente, outros objetivos específicos e complementares, mas estes são os dois mais importantes. Por um lado, então, identificar e compreender as trajetórias dos estudantes ciganos que estão incluídos ou que estão a frequentar, melhor dizendo, o ensino secundário, nas duas áreas metropolitanas de Lisboa e Porto, tentar também apreender as suas aspirações relativamente ao acesso ao ensino superior ou aspirações de entrada no mercado de trabalho, e para tal, obviamente, que cruzamos diversos níveis de análise e mobilizamos uma metodologia que é uma metodologia que podemos considerar caracterizada por alguma complexidade em termos de fases metodológicas. Utilizamos uma estratégia que podemos designar de multimétodos, na medida em que tentamos cruzar métodos quantitativos, qualitativos e também participativos, digamos que esta primeira fase da investigação, que tem este objetivo, entre outros, depois também serviu para fundamentar a segunda fase, que tem um caráter mais pragmático e tem um caráter mais, digamos, podemos considerar de investigação mais aplicada. Nesta segunda fase, o grande objetivo é, no fundo, fazer aqui o co-design de um currículo comum, que certificará, possivelmente em termos escolares e não tanto profissionais, como aqui está dito, e com o 12º ano, alguns ciganos que deixaram o sistema escolar, embora, e é importante reiterar que este currículo nunca será específico, obviamente, para os estudantes de origem cigana, embora esse seja o nosso enfoque principal, mas qualquer formação em que nós participemos, nomeadamente ao nível de co-design dessa formação e depois a sua implementação, será uma formação aberta a todos os jovens que abandonaram o sistema de ensino. Embora, como já disse, a nossa preocupação é, obviamente, ampliar o número de jovens ciganos e adultos jovens ciganos que eventualmente queiram voltar ao sistema de ensino. Digamos que esta formação baseia-se, porque já estamos a trabalhar nela e obviamente ainda não concluímos este objetivo, mas está em fase de conclusão, mas esta formação baseia-se em grande medida nos resultados obtidos na fase anterior e, por outro lado, é uma formação que está a ser construída com a participação de alguns ativistas ciganos, algumas pessoas que representam também associações, alguns jovens ciganos que frequentaram o ensino secundário e que hoje em dia estão no ensino superior, e também com algumas escolas, também com algumas instituições, nomeadamente a sociedade civil e também alguns serviços e instituições estatais que fazem parte da rede colaborativa que nós estamos a compor e que já daqui a pouco falaremos sobre essa rede comparativa. Seja como for, há aqui um processo de investigação-ação de caráter participativo e nos vários momentos do projeto tivemos sempre esta preocupação de envolver pessoas ciganas nesses vários momentos. É um projeto composto principalmente por parcerias com organizações do meio e que fazem um trabalho de proximidade com a população cigana. Relativamente à nossa pesquisa propriamente dita, temos aqui neste mapa, podemos considerar um mapa mais de caráter mental, estas várias fases metodológicas com diferentes momentos de recolha de dados. Saliento aqui os inquéritos online que efetuamos já no início, mais numa fase inicial do projeto, e assim, inquérito online subdivide-se aqui também em vários blocos. Fizemos inquéritos aos agrupamentos escolares, em que os diretores, vice-diretores e também professores responderam a esse inquérito. Temos 819 respostas a esse inquérito questionário. Fizemos também um inquérito questionário junto dos técnicos, chefias, diretores dos centros de emprego e centros de emprego e também formação, ou só apenas de emprego ou formação, eventualmente com a dupla valência, e relativamente a esse inquérito conseguimos obter, na altura, 262 respostas. Também fizemos um inquérito aos centros Qualifica, a técnicos e também as FIAs, e conseguimos também obter 67 respostas. É importante dizer que estes inquéritos decorreram sempre nas duas áreas metropolitanas de Lisboa e Porto, quer no caso dos agrupamentos, quer relativamente aos centros de emprego e formação e aos centros Qualifica. Para além deste momento, digamos, que tem mais a ver com a aplicação do inquérito questionário, fizemos um trabalho mais qualitativo e de proximidade com as pessoas ciganas e também realizamos então 2 etnografias centradas no cotidiano estudantil de 2 alunos de origem cigana. Realizamos também 31 entrevistas semi-estruturadas e semi-diretivas a jovens ciganos que estavam a frequentar o ensino secundário, e para além disso também realizamos 3 grupos focais com intervenções sociais, com pais, com professores, com ativistas, com jovens estudantes, e digamos que esta é a parte mais investigativa e que obviamente está interligada com estes 2 grandes objetivos. Depois temos aqui uma componente mais pragmática e mais ao nível de uma investigação aplicada, em que temos aqui 4 grandes atividades: o estabelecimento de uma rede colaborativa, a rede colaborativa é do CIG, que envolve universidades, envolve também organizações não governamentais, serviços públicos, câmaras municipais, escolas, projetos, associações, ativistas em nome individual, alguns investigadores também que aderiram à rede em nome individual, e o objetivo desta rede colaborativa é que, depois de terminarmos o projeto, esta rede consiga e tenha, obviamente, força também em termos institucionais, força suficiente para levar a efeito algumas das atividades que nós iniciamos também com este projeto. Para além disso, realizamos um curso de formação certificada para docentes sobre cultura, história e modos de vida das pessoas ciganas, em que também tivemos alguns formadores de origem cigana, não só, digamos, a lecionar os módulos, mas também ao nível da concepção. Estes formadores foram muito importantes para concebermos também os módulos de formação e depois também na sua implementação. Para além disso, as últimas atividades têm mais a ver com a realização de workshops em escolas sobre diversidade e diálogo intercultural nas 2 áreas metropolitanas de Lisboa e Porto, e também estamos a produzir um documentário sobre o projeto, por acaso não está aqui, mas foi uma atividade que, entretanto, decidimos também implementar, e temos aqui a formação certificada para jovens, que é uma atividade relativamente à qual ainda estamos a trabalhar, neste co-design, digamos, desta formação e dos modos de formação que vão fazer parte desta formação. Tenho também ainda aqui, só mais um bocadinho, 2 minutos se calhar, para falar aqui um pouco das várias fases do projeto que acabei de dizer. Digamos, temos aqui, no fundo, uma espécie de linha do tempo que nos permite observar as várias fases e momentos do projeto. Obviamente que o projeto também foi muito afetado pela pandemia, isso acabou por, de certo modo, interferir em muitas atividades, principalmente presenciais, por exemplo, ao nível da realização das etnografias, foi complicado a dada altura continuar este trabalho. Algum trabalho presencial que estamos a tentar agora fazer nestes últimos meses, ou temos estado a tentar fazer nestes últimos meses, porque não conseguimos antes também fazer, mas entretanto obviamente surgiram outros picos da pandemia que também acabou por interferir no nosso trabalho. Por último, e relativamente à investigação mais de caráter participativo, nós acreditamos que este projeto, sendo um projeto então de investigação-ação, tem e obviamente procura gerar aqui efeitos emancipatórios, de certo modo também entre as pessoas ciganas. No fundo, a nossa ideia com este projeto é que muitas destas atividades sejam feitas até agora, que estamos a fazer, obviamente, e depois futuramente, estas atividades impliquem sempre a presença de pessoas ciganas e também o próprio projeto e os seus resultados sejam apropriados pelas pessoas ciganas que, obviamente, também estão ligadas a associações e estão ligadas também a múltiplos projetos de intervenção. Mas, digamos, este tipo de investigação participativa e de caráter colaborativo, em que também envolvemos sempre diferentes organizações da sociedade, terá a curto e médio prazo efeito ao nível da transformação, em termos de mudanças, irá gerar mudanças sociais, não é? E irá, obviamente, ter estes efeitos emancipatórios e vai ser, obviamente, importante depois, futuramente, também avaliarmos os efeitos deste projeto. Agora, se calhar, passaria a palavra à minha colega Olga Magano, que irá falar precisamente desta parte dos projetos participativos que nós damos a efeito neste âmbito.
Olá, boa tarde a todos e a todas. Só gostaria que me confirmasse se conseguem visualizar o PowerPoint.
Conseguimos, sim.
Ok, muito obrigada. Então, dando seguimento à apresentação da Manuela e não pretendendo demorar muito, já estamos ligeiramente atrasados, portanto, eu vou fazer uma breve apresentação do trabalho que nós temos vindo a desenvolver no que se refere às metodologias participativas que estavam previstas inicialmente no projeto e outras que, entretanto, se desenvolveram mais nestes últimos tempos, também tendo em conta a própria evolução do projeto, nomeadamente sentimos a necessidade de fazer um registro que pudesse ficar documentado em imagem e daí também termos e estarmos ainda a trabalhar no sentido da produção de meios audiovisuais. Portanto, então esta fase da investigação das metodologias participativas procurou, sobretudo, criar espaço em que nós pudéssemos, através de uma série de áreas ou vertentes, podermos partilhar, por um lado, os nossos resultados da investigação e, por outro lado, trabalharmos com pessoas ciganas, com técnicos, com professores, numa perspectiva da criação de propostas enraizadas no conhecimento de todas estas pessoas que trabalham cotidianamente em prol da educação das crianças e jovens ciganos. Neste sentido, nós desenvolvemos no mês de outubro uma primeira edição de uma formação para docentes. Estamos neste momento a concretizar e, no fundo, a lançar as bases da criação de uma rede colaborativa. Realizamos alguns e temos previsto mais alguns workshops em escola. Estamos a desenvolver uma formação certificada e, como já referi, estamos a produzir um documentário. Portanto, no que se refere à formação certificada para professores, esta formação foi certificada, está certificada e foi desenvolvida pelos vários elementos da equipa do projeto, portanto, por mim, pela Manuela Mendes, pela Sara Pinheiro, Susana Mourão, Pedro Quetano, Pedro Candeias, a Florela Samagaio e a Ana Rita Costa. Nesta formação, nós contamos com vários convidados e convidadas ciganos e não ciganos para a realização das sessões síncronas, portanto, para as aulas face to face, portanto, cara a cara. Portanto, tivemos o Benjamin Barão, a Catarina Vieira, a Guiomar Sousa, a Toia Portêncio e a Maria Joana Costa, que são, portanto, os 4 primeiros são mediadores interculturais ciganos e a Maria Joana Costa é professora da Escola Secundária de Segunda Oportunidade de Matosinhos. Portanto, a primeira edição foi realizada no mês de outubro de 2021 e nós contamos que possamos vir a replicá-la brevemente na segunda edição e eventualmente até alargar a outro público, nomeadamente para técnicos e não só para professores. Portanto, esta formação teve por objetivo disponibilizar aos docentes informação de caráter sociológico sobre as pessoas ciganas em Portugal e sobre os seus principais traços culturais, considerando diversidades sociais e regionais, e também dar a conhecer diferentes perspectivas sobre uma realidade social complexa, marcada pela estigmatização, racismo e discriminação social, desconstruindo estereótipos e preconceitos. Procuramos também envolver os docentes para a exploração de abordagens pedagógicas diferenciadas e inclusivas, por forma a educar para a igualdade, inclusão e diversidade, respeitando as diferenças culturais e sociais, e fornecer estratégias e ferramentas para motivar estudantes para a persecução de trajetórias de continuidade de sucesso escolar e dar a conhecer estratégias de melhor comunicação com as famílias ciganas. Esta formação teve várias componentes, portanto a componente 1 teve vários temas, 3 temas: a história das pessoas ciganas em Portugal e no mundo, identidades, cultura e tradições ciganas, diversidade cultural e heterogeneidade de modos de vida. A componente 2, breve contextualização da realidade europeia, e o tema 2, situação atual das pessoas ciganas portuguesas, demografia, escolaridade, profissões de saúde e habitação. O componente 3, nesta componente abordamos 2 temas: o impacto das políticas na educação e também a questão das desigualdades, exclusão e pobreza das pessoas ciganas em Portugal. A componente 4 foi uma componente dedicada ao tema estigmas, preconceitos, racismo, segregações e discriminações contra as pessoas ciganas, e a componente 5, famílias ciganas e escola de relação. Tivemos ainda mais 2 componentes, a 7, em que abordamos a questão da importância da mediação a meio escolar, o envolvimento e participação das pessoas ciganas no sistema escolar, e a 7, em que abordamos práticas pedagógicas plurais e inclusivas, boas práticas e intervenções inovadoras. Portanto, foi possível nesta formação, depois desta parte mais teórica e em que também contamos com pessoas ciganas nestas aulas síncronas destes vários temas, foi possível aos professores e professoras realizarem um trabalho final, que foi uma proposta de elaborar uma planificação de uma unidade letiva com a concepção de práticas inclusivas e multiculturais de promoção de sucesso educativo de crianças e jovens ciganas. Portanto, foi uma experiência muito interessante e que espero que, de facto, possamos voltar a replicar muito em breve. Temos aqui alguns momentos, que foi, portanto, aqui os momentos de aulas síncronas com o Benjamin, com a Toia Portêncio, com a Guiomar Sousa, com a Catarina Vieira, portanto, que são pessoas de origem cigana e que participaram nesta formação. Outro momento das estratégias participativas que temos vindo a desenvolver são os workshops nas escolas e que têm por objetivo, no fundo, sensibilizar jovens ciganos e não ciganos para a desconstrução de ideias estereotipadas sobre as pessoas de origem cigana e outros grupos, proporcionar contactos com pessoas ciganas, no fundo funcionando como role model, promover atitudes de aceitação e respeito face às diferenças culturais, religiosas, sociais e étnicas, e no fundo criar momentos em que se possam partilhar e discutir ideias sobre esta questão das desigualdades sociais, da pertença étnica e da origem identitária, etc. Portanto, nós até ao momento realizamos 14 workshops, portanto, realizamos na área metropolitana do Porto e de Lisboa, realizamos, portanto, em 4 turmas do 6º ano do agrupamento de escolas Diogo de Macedo e Vila Nova de Gaia, em 6 turmas do agrupamento de escolas do Cerco do Porto, em 2 turmas do agrupamento de escolas Agualva, Mira Sintra, em Agualva de Cacém, em uma turma do agrupamento de escolas da Quirino Ribeiro, Oeiras, e numa turma do agrupamento de escolas Mais de Água, Amadora, em uma turma 10º ano. A todos eles, a todas estas pessoas, diretores de turma, diretores dos agrupamentos de escolas, nosso muito obrigado pela forma como fomos acolhidos nestas escolas. Temos ainda previsto, esperemos que seja possível, por causa da pandemia, realizar mais 2, uma no agrupamento de escolas Aquilino Ribeiro em Oeiras e outra no agrupamento de escolas Agualva, Mira Sintra, e desde já ficou o convite, se porventura quiserem, já nos apercebemos, temos aqui muitos professores nesta conferência, se porventura estiverem interessados podem contactar-nos, que desde que nós consigamos cumprir, teremos todo o gosto em ir fazer este workshop às vossas escolas. Portanto, aqui só para vos dar um bocadinho aquilo que nós pretendemos com estas atividades, nós no fundo, basicamente, propomos a que os alunos, partindo de uma reflexão que nós inicialmente apresentamos, um pequeno vídeo, seja sobre mediadores ciganos, seja sobre ciganos que estão no ensino superior, etc., propomos esses vídeos à discussão e depois, através de uma lógica de trabalho de grupo, convidamos os alunos a refletirem e depois a apresentarem, no fundo, uma conclusão do debate do grupo. Temos aqui algumas imagens dos workshops que realizamos, portanto, em que nós depois convidamos os alunos a irem, no fundo, ao quadro e a escreverem as frases e a discutirem as frases que cada grupo apresentou. Portanto, tem sido uma experiência muito rica e muito interessante. De facto, os jovens têm umas ideias bastante plurais relativamente a este assunto. Portanto, aqui algumas imagens. Portanto, tentando aqui só ilustrar, porque isto é muito mais longo para este tempo que temos aqui, sobre as frases que os alunos apresentaram e que vão muito nesta lógica de não julgar as pessoas antes de as conhecer. Todas as pessoas são diferentes, mas todos têm sonhos, devemos ajudar todos a serem integrados, no fundo todos devem poder perseguir os seus sonhos, todos devem ser tratados de igual forma. O ser de diferente etnia não define as capacidades de cada um. Portanto, isto ainda está em fase de análise, esperamos brevemente poder ter estes dados mais trabalhados de forma mais reflexiva. Outra estratégia participativa tem sido a criação desta rede, como a Manuela já tinha referido, da rede EduCig, que é uma plataforma colaborativa sobre políticas públicas e ciganos portugueses, e que tem por objetivo, no fundo, criar uma estrutura que permita a conciliação de várias pessoas, de várias organizações em torno desta questão. O que é que todos nós podemos fazer para melhorar o desempenho dos estudantes ciganos no ensino de uma forma geral, mas em particular no ensino secundário. Portanto, tem sido também uma experiência muito interessante, porque temos tido bastante adesão e que esta estrutura, no fundo, visa criar esta parceria, não só agora no tempo do projeto, mas que possa continuar para além do tempo do projeto, não é? E que concilie, por um lado, estruturas, entidades públicas, organizações não governamentais, associações, investigadores, técnicos, etc. Mais uma vez, como já apelei relativamente aos agrupamentos de escola, quem eventualmente tiver interesse em se associar a nós nesta rede, por favor, contacte-nos, que nós informaremos como devem proceder. Portanto, as atividades previstas nesta rede são, sobretudo, criarmos este espaço de recolha sistemática e partilha de informação acerca da formação e educação dos jovens ciganos em Portugal e das suas condições de empregabilidade, também de coprodução e divulgação de informação científica e técnica, contribuindo para a reflexão sobre as suas implicações práticas e políticas, envolvendo diretamente membros e representantes da população cigana. Como a Manuela já disse, em todas as fases deste projeto nós temos tido a colaboração de pessoas ciganas e também temos a colaboração de pessoas ciganas nesta rede EduCig. E pretendemos também, portanto, no fundo, conseguir uma participação colaborativa dos vários parceiros no planeamento e desenvolvimento no conjunto de programas de formação escolar e ao profissional certificados. Também as questões da atividade de mentoria para estudantes e sobre a formação de história, cultura e modos de vida ciganos para escolas. Portanto, estamos disponíveis para fazer os nossos workshops, se assim nos quiserem. Portanto, basta que entrem em contato através do nosso e-mail ou da nossa página, que nós estaremos disponíveis para fazer esta atividade. Portanto, outra das atividades da rede é organizar e participar em eventos científicos nacionais e internacionais e estabelecer também contactos com outras redes nacionais e internacionais, sobretudo nas que se centrem em torno de questões da diversidade e de cidadania em contextos de educação. Portanto, temos até este momento participantes da rede, mas com perspectiva deste número vir a aumentar, portanto, o Centro de Investigação de Estudos de Sociologia, de ESCTE, e temos o Alto Comissariado para as Migrações, o IFP, enquanto organismos públicos, temos alguns agrupamentos de escolas, a Gualva Mira Sintra, Diogo de Macedo, Vila Nova de Gaia, o Cerco do Porto, Mira Sintra, Gualva, Henriques Nogueira, Torres Pedra e Escola de Segunda Oportunidade de Matosinhos. Temos também algumas associações, ou fundações, a Associação Val Domingos de Águeda, o Espaço T do Porto, o Projeto Cercar, que é um programa um projeto de escolhas do bairro do Cerco do Porto, a Associação para o Desenvolvimento do Concelho de Moura, a Associação para o Planeamento da Família, a APF Norte, Projeto Ajuda 2020, Casa 6 e o Projeto a Rodar, que também é um projeto de escolhas. Temos várias câmaras municipais, Almada, Matosinhos, Moura, Oeiras, Vila Nova de Gaia, Setúbal, e temos, até ao momento, esperemos que possam vir a crescer este número, a Junta de Freguesia da Ajuda de Lisboa. Alguns estudantes ciganos, a Bianca Coutinho, a Estéreo, o Jadião, e temos também alguns mediadores, ativistas ou investigadores, o Sr. Aberto Montes, o António Palma, que é um investigador, o Benjamin, que é um mediador intercultural, o Carlos Medina, que é investigador, a Guilmar e a Toia, que são ativistas e mediadoras interculturais. Aqui alguns símbolos destas instituições que nos apoiam. Portanto, a primeira reunião desta rede ocorreu a semana passada, no dia 13 de janeiro. Prevemos realizar a próxima no princípio do mês de junho. Como já referi, quem eventualmente ainda não esteja nesta rede, mas nos queira contactar, está aqui o e-mail, podem nos contactar através destes contactos. Outro, digamos, output que nós estamos neste momento a trabalhar é a criação de uma formação certificada para jovens no ensino secundário, ciganos e não ciganos, e que visa conceber um currículo ao nível do 12º ano, a jovens ciganos e não ciganos que abandonaram o sistema educativo. Portanto, a novidade desta proposta é que nós estamos a basear-nos nos resultados que obtivemos, quer através dos nossos inquéritos que aplicamos, quer através das entrevistas e dos grupos focais que realizamos a jovens ciganos. Daí que esperamos que esta formação, que será centrada nas áreas que nós identificamos, ou melhor, que foram identificados pelos jovens que participaram das fases anteriores de estudo, possam ser de facto totalmente adequadas aos desejos e às aspirações destes jovens e que se situam sobretudo na área da mediação, no empreendedorismo e na área da produção cultural. Portanto, esqueci-me de dizer que estamos a trabalhar esta formação certificada em conjunto com a Escola de Segunda Oportunidade de Matosinhos e esperamos em breve poder também ter, digamos, uma versão mais ou menos definitiva desta proposta. Outro output, e que tem que ver também com uma estratégia participativa que resulta de tudo aquilo que nós já vimos até aqui, foi a produção do documentário. A página, nós a determinada altura entendemos que seria muito importante ficar com o registro de algumas das etapas deste projeto e então decidimos produzir um documentário. Este documentário está a ser co-produzido pela BAMEI, que é uma estrutura sobretudo direcionada para a antropologia, mas que nos está a fazer este apoio. Temos aqui algumas imagens da produção deste documentário. Portanto, isto são aqui algumas pessoas que participaram. Portanto, eu vou agora brevemente ver se funciona este vídeo, ou então passo já diretamente para a Magdalena.
Sim, eu posso já partilhar.
Acho que é melhor, eu vou interromper. Portanto, entretanto, a Magdalena vai pôr o vídeo, porque eu tentei há pouco e não consegui.
Conseguem ver o YouTube?
Sim, conseguimos.
Sim, sim.
São tempos diferentes, é verdade. É verdade, não é assim que era mais ele assim.
Antigamente as crianças, elas iam desde muito novos para as feiras, para o negócio e aprendiam a fazer aquele negócio. Como a escola ocupa esse tempo, quando eles chegam a uma certa altura, os pais veem que os filhos não têm locação no mercado de trabalho, eles estudaram para chegarem lá, eles também depois não conseguem fazer o que os pais faziam para se desenrascar.
O que eu vi que me atrapalhava um bocado era lá andar numa escola particular. Não é para qualquer pai que possa pagar uma escola particular. Mas pronto, sempre o meu sonho foi ter um filho, tirar uma formação, apostei na Bianca, fiz o sacrifício e estou a fazer. E eu acho que é gratificante sobre estas questões.
É por isso que os pais não veem que a escola seja um benefício para as comunidades ciganas. E isso poderia ser mudado se houvesse oportunidades, quando esses jovens, eles concluíssem, neste caso, o secundário ou até a licenciatura, fossem integrados no mercado de trabalho.
Olá, meu nome é Dião, tenho 19 anos, sou africano, sou cigano e sou português.
Sou do Porto, nasci e cresci lá. E neste momento eu estou aqui em Lisboa, na Escola Superior de Teatro e Cinema, a tirar o curso de teatro.
Graças a Deus hoje já temos médicos ciganos, temos o primeiro médico cigano, que é o Israel, já temos pessoas assim com uma mente mais aberta. Porque dentro dos ciganos há vários tipos de ciganos.
O meu conselho é que é estudar, não parem, continuem, porque de facto faz todo sentido, muda a nossa vida, constrói a nossa vida ao estudo.
Temos que nos agarrar à escola mesmo, porque temos que ser alguém na vida, tanto como aplicarmos nos nossos sonhos e mostrarmos que somos capazes e que vale a pena estar na escola.
Um pouco da nossa história fazia um bocado da diferença e era um bocado motivacional para nós, mesmo para as pessoas da nossa etnia e mesmo para as pessoas que não são da nossa etnia. O que ajudava a compreender um pouco os nossos costumes, a nossa cultura e que nem sempre roubamos e que nem sempre fazemos as coisas más e que nem sempre somos nómadas.
Como se sabe, existe uma grande taxa de abandono por parte de jovens da etnia cigana do ambiente escolar. Se não é abandono, é quase abandono, porque não aparecem às aulas. Isso é uma realidade que existe em Portugal, acho que está à vista de todos. E muitas vezes as pessoas perguntam-me sempre, mas tu és diferente, tu és... Eu não sou diferente, provavelmente se eu nascesse num meio diferente, eu neste momento estaria na mesma situação.
A escola consegue ser dura. Há muitas regras, não estou a perceber nada.
Dá um abraço à professora.
Porque será que eu te amo assim? Porque será que Deus te deu para mim? Eu acho que ainda não entendeste.
É necessário trabalhar muito a autoestima destes miúdos porque eles dizem que são burros porque são ciganos.
Já quando andava no infantário, as professoras já me diziam que era uma miúda que tinha capacidades muito fortes para ir longe. E nós, como pais, vimos isso.
Tu deixas de ser cigano por te sentares numa mesa? Tu deixas? Sentes-te menos cigano, estás aqui sentado? Não, pai, não. Quando estás na escola e dizes assim, aquele cigano que fez aquilo, não te sentes orgulhoso de saber que o cigano fez aquilo? Sentes, não te sentes? Quanto mais se tu começares a pesquisar sobre... Há muita coisa que aconteceu que foram ciganos que fizeram. Quem tornou o Brasil independente foi o cigano que assinou. Não sei se sabias disso. Quem assinou a carta de o Brasil ser independente? Quem assinou? Foi um cigano. Pois é. E quanto mais conheces, mais sabes. Ir para a escola assim, eu sei que é uma seca, não sei o que, não sei o que. Mas a vossa família faz o quê? É cestas ou é feirante?
É tudo um pouco. E o meu pai é segurança. E o meu pai está a ver tudo.
Mas vai inteiramente. A minha família é feirante.
E a minha família é guarda noturna. É segurança.
E vocês, por exemplo, querem ser guardas?
Obrigada, Magdalena. Eu esqueci-me só de referir que isto ainda não é o documentário, isto é só um trailer do documentário, portanto, o documentário será mais longo, mas em todo caso temos aqui já uma boa prestação do que promete vir a ser o documentário. Pronto, depois se tiverem algumas questões, estaremos aqui para esclarecer o que entenderem importante, ok? Passo-te a palavra, Manuela.
Muito boa tarde novamente. Uma vez que já estamos um bocadinho atrasados no programa, eu se calhar iria passar rapidamente para as nossas keynote speakers e depois iríamos abrir no final da intervenção delas, iríamos ter aqui um tempo para questões, comentários e também um tempo de debate. Eu vou então apresentar a professora Margaret Greenfield, que vai intervir em primeiro lugar, e depois, quando for, obviamente, a intervenção da professora Teresa farei a sua apresentação. So, thank you very much, Margaret and Teresa, for coming to this conference. And in first place, I want to present Professor Margaret Greenfield. She is Professor of Social Policy in the Faculty of Health, Education, Medicine and Social Care in the Anglia Ruskin University. She is a research specialist in the field of social inclusion with particular reference to inclusion, health, access to education and training, and accommodation issues, ethnicity, equalities, and social justice, with a specific emphasis on undertaking collaborative research with communities at the risk of marginalization and racism and othering. She worked very closely with Gypsy, Traveler, and more recently, migrant Roma communities. And in the recent years, she has developed participatory action research programs with vulnerable migrants and vulnerable groups such as refugee and asylum seeking women and people experiencing street homeless. So the communication of Professor Margaret Greenfield is very connected with our project, of course, and the title is Problematizing Roma and Cigano Youth and Family Engagement in Education and Problematizing Misrepresentation, Misapplication and Misunderstanding within the Academy. Bom, então, muito rapidamente em português, a nossa primeira keynote speaker é a professora Margaret Greenfield, e eu vou aqui abreviar, peço desculpa, ela é professora de Política Social na Faculdade de Saúde e Educação Medicina e Assistência Social na Universidade Anglia Ruskin, no Reino Unido, e é uma pessoa que trabalha já há muitos anos, é ativista e trabalha há muitos anos sobre as comunidades ciganas, que obviamente no Reino Unido usam outra designação, falam mais em ciganos e também há os travelers, que têm obviamente características bastante diferentes dos nossos ciganos nómadas. A Margaret é também consultora do nosso projeto e agradecemos muito a sua presença. So Margaret, thank you very much for your presence. You have, of course, your time to make your presentation, and
thank you so much.
Your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now I will attempt to share this screen. Hopefully it will work. I apologize for not sending this over earlier, but I perhaps will send it in case there's any issues as well, which people would like to be able to share. Hopefully this is going to work. Okay. So I actually said I was going to give you quite an ambitious presentation. We're talking about deproblematizing the way Roma and Chicano youth and family engagement are perceived of in both Portugal and the UK. And I realized that actually I've got a lot to get through, so I'm not going to cover quite as much as I'd initially hoped. Can you see the screen okay as I do the slides?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So from the beginning, I'm now going, because I won't necessarily be able to see what's happening, so you might need to tell me if there's some questions. So I want to talk just briefly about deproblematizing perceptions, and then I'm going to give you a comparative presentation about work we've been undertaking in the UK, talking as well about some of the similarities with the approaches which are being used by our colleagues who've kindly invited me to present today. So I wanted to just very briefly contextualize the situation. I apologize because this may well have occurred before I actually reached you, and also I'm afraid I do not speak Portuguese, so I'm unaware of what's gone on necessarily before. So I'm going to just touch on this briefly. So we have, we know that there's widespread exclusion across multiple domains of Roma, Chicano and other travellers across Europe. So the broad figure is that 62% of young people from these communities are out of education or employment or training. That's throughout Europe, and that's accounts of the European community data from 1020. We're also aware, as I'm sure everyone who is attending are familiar with, that education is a required theme under the Roma integration strategies over the past 10 years, which have mainly focused on the overall framework of socio-economic inclusion. There's been a more recent update, which is now focused on equality, inclusion and participation through the new EU Roma strategic framework. And these three areas, equality, inclusion and participation, perfectly frame for those of us who are working in action research the way we find most effective to engage with the broader populations in terms of enhancing educational inclusion. So I wanted us to think a little bit in terms of, if we are using action research, what are the core similarities and issues which exist across Europe and therefore are pertinent for the Portuguese situation, as well as where I'm working in the UK. So we know that statistics very broadly across Europe indicate that there is high rates of discrimination and racism. Now, the Council of Europe said in 2020 that 41% of members of the population have experienced discrimination and racism. I think that's far too low. Recent research in the UK has indicated that over 90% of young gypsies, Roma and travellers in education talk about discrimination, exclusion and bullying within schools. And that's one of the key areas which leads to disengagement from education. I mean, certainly in my practice, we're familiar with cases where there's been both physical violence arising from racist bullying, as well as the more sort of low-level constant discrimination, which continues, where people are misrepresented, that there are these very negative stereotypes which constantly appear within the curricula, the way people are presented, and often go unchallenged within school settings, whether this is from school pupils or indeed from teachers themselves. But broadly speaking, these are some of the areas, both discrimination and racism, both within education and in broader context, segregated schooling. Now, we don't have that in the UK, and I know you don't in Portugal either, but of course we're aware that in many countries, despite legal challenges, particularly Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, there is still de facto segregated schooling. So this might be where some children who are Roma, speaking Romanis as a first language, are predominantly placed in special schools, in quotes, perceived of as suffering particular educational challenges, or it could be forms of segregation where schools only accept children and young people from particular localities. So by definition, you don't have that sort of cross-cultural engagement with young people from other backgrounds. We also know, and you can see how I've cited a very recent book from our colleagues, that there's low educational attainment and early school leaving, which is widespread across Europe. This has further been exacerbated by the impacts of COVID-19. So there's structural racism has been identified in Portugal, but we know that COVID has had a massive impact in relation to how young people are experiencing their education. I've been involved, for example, in a project which ended last summer with young Roma girls, which was working to support engagement in education and consider other alternatives to early school leaving and marriage. And what we found was quite a high percentage of those young people left education earlier than had been anticipated. And this was often associated with COVID impacts and not being able to access learning, not having access to computers, and perhaps in some cases going into earlier marriage. So we have this range of structural issues which impact young people, but alongside that, there are these overriding presumptive arguments by education authorities, individual schools, and many professionals, which actually identify and presume that young people from these community backgrounds are disengaged from school, that they don't value education, and they will not be supported if they wish to remain in school. And moreover, that there is a sort of sense of laziness and just generally that education is not something which is valued by Roma and Cigano communities. So how do we actually start to challenge this? Well, I'm arguing, as indeed are our colleagues in Portugal and elsewhere, that one of the central things we need to do is problematize and reverse these presumptions. This assumption there is community failure, a lack of motivation, and essentially a deficit model of the populations. And a way of doing this is we need to explore inclusive educational approaches. And I'm sure Paulo Freire has been cited earlier today and in many of the publications. But essentially, we need to work with communities as change agents. And the work that we've been undertaking in the UK, as have our colleagues in Portugal, is working through partnership with academics and educationalists to gain traction through policy engagement. So some of the work that I'm particularly involved in at the moment is starting to work, as I will talk you through in a little bit, with universities to help influence the curricula which teachers go through as they themselves are learning to become teachers. So they have a greater understanding of the community's population's approaches to learning, and also the values and interests and barriers. So within this work, this idea of gaining traction through challenging and problematizing the academy, the lessons which are taught within school and to teachers as they develop, we need to interrogate those presumptions. We need to look at what are educationalists bringing with them when they engage with members of the Chicano, Roma traveller populations, and also policy specialists, because we can work with teachers in certain contexts, but we need to also be able to work closely with policy specialists, those people who are tasked with engaging with the European Roma integration strategy and therefore creating some leverage. And alongside that, we need to work very closely in collaboration with families and communities, arguing too that it's critical that we constantly foreground the power dynamics and structural inequalities in how we engage with all of the different stakeholders. It can be very, very challenging, obviously, for community members, whether they are working in academic positions or with NGOs, with community groups, to actually challenge those in positions of authority who have the power to make or break careers, or in particularly during the time of COVID, perhaps, to grade children in different ways. So in the UK, we did not have public exams for 2 years. What we've had are teacher grading of pupils, which therefore has an immense impact on people's opportunity to proceed perhaps into further and higher education. For a family, a community who are facing racism and discrimination already, and these presumptions about their community, it can become particularly challenging in order to say to a teacher, no, I think that's an unfair grading, or are you aware of these impacts which COVID has caused us, digital exclusion, for example, or children, perhaps some Roma children from the UK we know have returned to countries of origin, and therefore there's been a lot of struggles in order to continue to obtain education. So that's the sort of backdrop. I could go on a lot longer, but I want to talk about our work, but that's the backdrop to our particular position with the work we're undertaking. But it is constantly bringing back the issue of power dynamics, structural inequalities in our own national context and also internationally. So I want to talk a little bit now about some work that we've been engaged with around supporting members of the communities in the UK into and within higher education. Now, the broad policy term in the UK is GRT, Gypsies, which is not, I hasten to add, a stigmatizing or stigmatized term in the same way in Britain as it is in many countries. So members of the Romani Gypsy community, Roma people, of migrant Roma populations, and other travellers. We know that whereas there's around 67% of young people aged 18 to 30 in the UK who go into higher education, there is only around 3% of members of the self-identified Gypsy, Roma and traveller population in the UK. And I can see from a publication last year from our colleagues that only 2.5% of people from the population in Portugal either can leave school at the full duration of education or go into higher education. I mean, I've picked that up from a publication. There'll obviously be more information to come on that. So There a broad similarity. We have a considerable underrepresentation across the populations of people from these communities who are going into further and higher education. So what are the similarities in the work we've undertaken in the UK and our colleagues have in Portugal? In both of these, we focused on identifying the attitudes of teachers, which act as both barriers and enablers, and looking at how we can provide the tools to change this and therefore enhance social justice. We've both used qualitative and attitudinal methods, and we've triangulated community members' experiences and attitudes with that of professionals, and similarly looked at extant data sets. Now, I'm aware there's challenges in terms of accessing data in Portugal, which we don't have in the UK, where we do have ethnicized data sets where schools make a return of young people's self-identified ethnicity. From the UK, we have here this figure that says 13% of young people from Roma or Gypsy communities leave school with what we assume is the gold standard 5 GCSEs, which is General Certificate of Education in Maths, English and other core subjects. And 64% of young people from other populations, including a range of minority ethnic populations, attain these. So you can see we've got this large differential. Another area where there's similarities between the work of our Portuguese colleagues and ourselves in the UK is looking at issues around peer mentoring and actual observation within educational settings. We've also similarly identified gender as a key variable in outcomes and an emphasis on development of inclusive methodologies and curricular interventions. So I'm now going to talk to you about some of the work we've done. And if I'm going too slowly and I'm running out of time, do please speed me up, someone. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been focusing very much on the transition to higher education for young people from the communities. We've expanded this too by popular call to look at occupational traveller groups, the showmen, those people who are travelling fairgrounds and circus performers, and also boaters, people who live on boats. Now they're slightly different, but we have seen a certain degree of exclusion around digital issues or being forced to move on if they're living on boats and cannot stay in one place, disrupting education. It's worth noting here too that around sort of 1/3 of our populations of Romani gypsies and travellers live in caravan sites. There's a degree of nomadism, not amongst all, but there is still migration, and of course Roma populations migration within the UK and also home pendulum migration. But our core approach to this work is ensuring that support and access to education is enhanced because it's a matter of social justice. It impacts employment, social mobility, visibility and equality, as you all know. In 2019, there was a UK government report for the select committee, and I was one of the people amongst many others who gave evidence and were called to speak to parliamentarians. And education was picked up as one of the key themes and how we need to engage more with what's called the levelling up agenda in order to enhance access to education for young people and break down barriers. So we've worked closely with our parliamentarians and policy professionals, and we continue to do so. So there's a call for evidence at the moment in the UK, which ends next week, asking for experts to respond to challenges and issues, identify what is holding back young people from the communities in accessing education, and also to make some suggestions for how a fund which has just been released, which will support education for communities, can best be used. So I and others will obviously be responding to that. We're also working in collaborative networks with municipal local governments and educationalists. And this has arisen from some of the work we've undertaken. And I refer to a report there for what's called Go Higher West Yorkshire. The report will be due out in the next 3 to 4 weeks from work we undertook last year, where we worked in partnership. So I've already mentioned how there's this sort of low rate of engagement in higher education. But what's been very interesting is over the last few years, we've begun to see an increase in young people from the communities going into higher education. And you can see here from the figures that there were 90 people in the year 2012-13. And most recently, we now have 325 young people who self-identify as Roma, Gypsy or Traveller who are in higher education. And most noticeably, this has occurred over the last 2 years. This is predominantly in undergraduate education, however, and at postgrad, we see there's only 55 people from the communities and 35 students who are on taught masters, leading to 20 undertaking PhDs and doctorates. And this is something we clearly need to expand and engage with, because these are the professionals of the future, those who will be impacting how curricula is designed and support, not only acting as role models, but also influencing and impacting the academy and policy engagement. We also have data on apprenticeships. So learning whilst being paid in the job. I don't quite know what the comparative term is for apprenticeships, but these are across a range of areas. It might be in health work, it might be in education, it might be in practical skills. But of those, we only have 350 young people who are enumerated as being from the communities undertaking apprenticeships. But there's barriers to entering these apprenticeships. People have to have either those qualifications, the GCSEs I mentioned in maths and English, or complete training in maths and English whilst they're on the job and undertaking the programme. So if they're at too low a level, it acts as a barrier for them to undertake this work, further impacting how they can progress. So what have we done? What have we tried to do to challenge this? Part of our action research is we've created a network of good practice, and we've brought together community member graduates from the populations, universities, and NGOs, which is the term we use in the UK, non-governmental organisations or community groups. And we're using this as an evidence base to increase social inclusion. We set up a network, a JISC-mail network, and you're very welcome if anyone would like to join this who's not in the UK, though it's predominantly UK focused. And we launched it in January 2020 as a follow-up to the round table we held in the House of Lords in Westminster at the end of 2019. So 2 years on, we now have 113 members, and out of those, 66 are directly employed by universities in dedicated widening participation or academic admissions roles. And we asked people, when someone joins the network, we say, what are you hoping to gain from the network? What can we do to help you? What will you bring? And we can see from that a very large majority, 99%, are actively involved in what's called widening participation activities. So therefore, engaged in outreach or access. 88% were keen to network with other universities, higher education institutions or colleges, and 62, so quite a high number, want to expand their institution's knowledge in order to better meet the needs and support students from the populations. We also have networks where universities can work in clusters called UniConnect networks. These are partially funded by a government department called the Office for Students. And we have 3 such networks who have now joined our community of practice. And that means they have in-reach on average to 6 or 7 universities within their locality. We also have the government-funded department, the Office for Students, and representatives of a number of specialist community groups at local and national level who work with and support the community and their families. So what are our methods? We want to base our practice on findings and surveys of student experience and also underpin staff knowledge so that we can undertake knowledge transfer. We've carried out surveys of our members, we've carried out interviews and workshops, predominantly before COVID, but some online, with graduates and populations, and focus groups with academic colleagues to find out what they feel they need to know in order to best support the students. Now, I'm only going to touch upon some of those findings, but I'll give you a little flavour. And we're creating a virtuous cycle. So we gain information, we go and feed it back into conference and workshop sessions, and from there we engage with more practitioners. And we're seeing already an expansion into academic curricula where members of the network are perhaps being asked to come and present at universities. So if there are social workers or trainee teachers, for example, who will be working with the populations, there's an opportunity for them to hear from community members or academics or graduates who are part of the network who are communities to talk about their experiences, needs and barriers. So what are some of the key themes which came out from talking to staff? Well, they generally said they had a lack of knowledge about communities. They didn't know how to engage. Sometimes they were quite nervous in engaging. They were scared, or they'd just taken on board these stereotypes, the things I mentioned initially in terms of how we need to challenge the way the academy presents information. Generally, people felt that it would be helpful to have a member within their own university or whom they could access through our network to approach for information or guidance about the community's cultural practices and how best to engage. A key theme that arose was how to deal with stereotypes and racism. This might be from other students, but also staff acknowledged they might have their own personal bias, the knowledge they felt they'd gained through television and media. And they wanted to learn how to challenge respectfully themselves and others when they have limited knowledge. So if someone made a comment which was racist in a lecture, for example, sometimes the staff member might feel, I don't know if that's racist or it's actually accurate. And we've gathered a lot of information from graduates from the communities who talk about the way stereotypes are perpetuated within lectures. They might have gone to university, maybe they haven't felt comfortable self-identifying, and they've heard lecturers or staff who are training those teachers or those social workers or those other professionals and simply recycling stereotypes such as young women aren't going to remain in education because they're going to leave and have children, or yes, they move on all the time, which takes no notice of the fact so many people are in sedentarized accommodation. There was also issues about lack of tailored resources, the invisibility within the curricula of the population, and that sometimes there was either inaccurate information, which staff often felt unable to assess for its accuracy, or it was very old and dated, so it really did not reflect the reality in the current day. It could be quite romanticized, for example. People felt there was a lack of knowledge of the challenges faced by communities, and this goes to the core of what we're speaking about in relation to education. If a teacher does not understand what is going on for a community, they don't know what are those challenges, they're not aware of the fact there might be digital exclusion, parents might not be literate, there might be other pressures for people to go out to work, how can they necessarily respond effectively? There was also discussion on communication style, because one of the things which emerged from some of our community members we interviewed was the fact that when they were really engaged and interested, they might be quite loud in how they debate with a teacher, for example, and a teacher might see this as simply being rude or aggressive, rather than actually reflecting on the fact this was engagement from the young person who really wanted to know more. And general questions about in-reach and increasing knowledge, how to work with communities, and where do they start to find resources. So I'm just giving you just a couple of flavours here of some quotes from focus groups. So University Network Widening Participation Coordinator spoke about the need to obtain more information, develop outreach materials. Someone else from another university, we want to support the community, we want to learn, we need to offer support, which we felt quite positive that there was this sense of wishing to engage, although people were unaware of how to do so. And we have here someone who was teaching teachers the postgraduate certificate in education, and they said, we want to improve the educational experiences starting in primary school for children from these communities, but that means increasing the cultural awareness for teachers. Again, just another couple of quotes. How people felt nervous about making suggestions. I want to be inclusive, but if I don't know more, I need the reassurance of being able to engage with someone, because I think there's a risk. If I say, oh, I know this, they'll get it wrong or cause offence. So once more, this call for having knowledgeable people, and it could be materials or videos which can be accessed, or an individual someone can contact within a university network. Just another one here about people looking at resources. I thought this was particularly interesting here from an academic lead who was training health professionals. And they said that they wanted to know more about the cultural background, and they pointed out that they work with Muslim students, migrant students, and they're very sort of culturally aware, they're sensitive. So she said in clinical practice, we have, this broad point of view of trying to bring in service users to address cultural aspects, not just medical conditions, but they didn't have that experience when they were working with Gypsy traveller and Roma populations, and they felt there was a real need to do so within the curricula to enhance knowledge and ensure best practice for the populations. So this brings us now to the other aspect, and I'm aware I need to speed on quite a lot here. So we created the network of practice, but what we've also done through consultation with community groups, community graduates, and universities is create a pledge of good practice. And this is a pledge for universities to take. So it's been co-produced through this careful, organic, developing response to what we see as a social justice issue. And the collective focus on it is enhancing the network of practice and developing good practice. You'll see there the logo, Gypsy Traveller, Roma, Showman and Boaters into Higher Education. We've used the colours of the Roma flag, green, blue and red. We have the Showman's Wheel for fun fairs and also a picture of a boat. So this was co-produced, co-designed by community members and approved as a logo. And any university who signs up to the pledge, which I'm going to talk you through briefly, they can use this logo on their materials, which also means if someone from the community is thinking about becoming involved, maybe going into further or higher education, if they see that logo, they're going to know that there is an interest in supporting within that particular institution. So what are the core elements? We felt it was critically important that the very highest level, the rector, the senior person, the vice principal, the vice chancellor or principal had to sign up to the pledge so that there was highest level engagement. We say there's going to be light touch monitoring. We only launched the pledge on January the 21st last year. We've now got quite a few universities who've begun to sign up, and we will be sending out a monitoring form later this month so we can see what people are doing to make sure they're actually committing to the pledge and not just saying, oh, we're signing up and not doing anything. It doesn't cost anything, and that's important too. And obviously people are invited to join the network. And membership of the network, as we've said, it disseminates activities, support from peers and community members, and sharing good practice. So, for example, what we've done is we've had several, in fact, I can think of 3 people who are members of the Romani Gypsy community who've now gone to university in the last year. They're training in social work and education. And what we've managed to do is network them up with a qualified member of their community who is, for example, a social worker or a teacher. So there is that peer mentoring, and they're also networked with the person inside their own university. We're starting to develop materials, design materials, and of course provide this input to training programs and make sure that there is recognition and clear identification of good resources and within the curricula. And we're beginning to develop local and regional partnerships, as I've alluded to, through university networks, working with community organisations and graduates from the communities who live in that locality. One of the things which is problematic, I'm aware, for in some countries is data gathering. And I've already said we have this opportunity for people to self-identify as a member of the community when they sign up to a university in the UK. This hasn't been widespread. Showmen and boaters are not included, but the government department, the Office for Students, has now suggested that this should hopefully be expanded. I have a meeting on Friday, in fact, with a key, well, it's one of the big monitoring bodies who actually sort of set out the requirements and the regulations for universities that provides the information so that people can register through UCAS as a community member. And we're going to be having those conversations about the expansion. Gypsy and Roma were not able to disaggregate, but we're now, as of this year, able to disaggregate the communities. So someone can say, I'm a Roma from Bulgaria, for example, or I'm an English Romani Gypsy. And also travellers can self-identify. So we say to universities, monitor this. And therefore you'll be able to see if there's trends year on year and evaluate that within your institution to see if what you're doing is enhancing practice and bringing more students into the community. There's
Margaret, I'm sorry, but it's possible to make the final conclusion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay, let me just skim through quickly. Okay, so people can see.
Very sorry.
No, that's fine. So these are the different elements of outreach and inclusion. I'm so sorry for going on too long. These are some of the resources that have been drawn together, for example, people can access. And where are we now? I've mentioned there's quite a large number of people in the network and the community. These were the elements. Again, we can suggest that people work through these, identify, and that's really the conclusion. We have challenges and findings in both Portugal and the UK, which are broadly similar, with early school leaving, low educational attainment, and attitudinal presumption. COVID-19's widened inequalities, but we feel particularly in the UK, Black Lives Matter has allowed us to bring forward this issue of social justice and challenging racism, and also the EU policy focus on Roma inclusion. We feel that there's grounds for leveraging commonality of research and internationalisation. So being able to present today, to talk to colleagues in Portugal who are undertaking similar research is important for us to support each other in developing this partnership. And then finally, I cannot emphasise enough the need to co-produce workable models which enhance education and employment inclusion for the populations. And within that, constantly hold the academy, universities, teachers themselves to account, to problematise and challenge the practices that we can be complicit, perhaps, in supporting. So we need to undermine that, to challenge and to bring about greater opportunities. Thank you, and I'm sorry for going on too long.
Thank you very much. We are late, so I'm deeply sorry for this interruption, but it was very interesting, your intervention, and we can learn a lot from your experience and from your intervention, of course. And we can see some similarities with our project, but we, of course, see huge differences also. But it was a very interesting and a very good experience that you bring today here in this context. So if the participants have some specific questions, if you want, you can put some specific questions in the chat to Margaret, because now we must present the other panelist, Professor Teresa Sorda-Marti. Of course, in the end, we can have a big discussion, but if you have some more questions, you can put now. Em português, desculpem, se calhar estou aqui a repetir, mas se quiserem por agora fazer algumas questões específicas à professora Margaret, podem fazer através do bate-papo em inglês, obviamente. Nós vamos fazer um debate final, mas certamente já vai ser tardio. Pedimos desculpa pelo atraso. So, I must present now Teresa Sorda-Marti. Professor Teresa has a PhD from Harvard University, is a Serra Hunter Associate Professor of Sociology at the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, and she's has been working in different areas of sociology, and specifically about Roma minority and migrants in Europe, looking at different aspects in relation to this social group, such as social mobilization, women's rights, in migration, education, health, and more recently, she has been involved in studying the social impact of research, and at the moment, she is the principal investigator of the H2020 Refugee Aid Project. Agora, para português, a professora Teresa Sorda-Marti é doutorada pela Universidade de Harvard, é professora associada da Serra Hunter da Universidade Autónoma de Barcelona. O trabalho da professora tem vindo a centrar-se em grande medida nas questões muito ligadas à minoria roma ou aos ciganos, ritanos, mas também aos roma em termos europeus e também nos migrantes da Europa. Tem analisado estes vários grupos sobre diferentes aspectos e dimensões, como, por exemplo, ao nível da mobilização social, direitos das mulheres, migração, educação e saúde, e recentemente tem também estudado o impacto das pesquisas sociais na própria sociedade e neste momento é investigadora principal do projeto H2020 Refugee Head. A comunicação que a professora Teresa nos traz aqui hoje tem a ver com os exemplos bem-sucedidos, digamos, de inclusão dos ciganos. So, the presentation of the Professor Teresa is about successful examples of Roma inclusion. Thank you very much, Teresa, for coming to this conference. And I'm sorry for this time is so late, but of course we now are very interested in your communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. Thank you to all the organizations. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Es un placer estar aquí hoy. It's my pleasure to be here and to present some of my group's work. So I'm going to share the screen. Yeah. So. Can you see it? No.
Not yet, Teresa.
Hold on. Now you can see it?
Yes. Yes, it's okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to be speaking in English. I try to speak very slowly. I think that my presentation fits very well after Margaret's one and also after the project presentation, because I think that we are talking along the same lines of very important and timing issues for the Romani studies and especially for the Roma communities. So as already Margaret started also her presentation, there is a need to overcome a lot of stereotypes and images and very well-established prejudices among Roma families, among Roma students, among Roma women. And sometimes this has been promoted by research. That's what we call exclusionary research. So science throughout the history and even now, I would say, it has played a role in promoting this type of stereotypes and these types of prejudices that it's time to overcome, and that many Roma communities all around the world are showing them grown. Yeah. So this exclusionary research has been normally characterized by these three aspects. One is very well known and already has been addressed. Normally this exclusionary research is about Roma, but without counting with the people and the participation and the voice of the Roma people. Yeah. A second feature of this exclusionary research is that it's based on hopes, on beliefs, but not based on scientific facts and evidence. Yeah. And the third one, and I think that here I would like to emphasize, because I think that it's also of key, this third aspect is that this exclusionary research traditionally and historically has not produced any social impact, even the contrary. It has not produced any benefit to the Roma communities because it does not provide any scientific knowledge that contributes to overcoming social exclusion, poverty, absenteeism, school failure, as many of the issues that have been presented here. But on the contrary, sometimes, and this is what is really needed to address, this type of research and this type of statements have contributed to legitimize, reproduce, or fit existing stereotypes and prejudices. Yeah. So I would say like that maybe 20 years ago or something like that, or even more, there has been a trend, yeah, of moving away from this type of research, and that has been showed to promote social and educational exclusion. Yeah. And there are many examples of research, and EduCig, I think that is one of these examples, that are moving away from this paradigm, this traditional paradigm, and opening up the discussion and the creation of knowledge, of scientific knowledge, in dialogue with the communities. An example of it is the Workolo project that was part of the 5th framework program of the European Commission. The Workolo project was meant to identify strategies to promote the labor inclusion of the Roma community throughout Europe. And the final conference, the final meeting was held at the European Parliament. And at that European Parliament, instead of being us, the researchers who were presenting the results and the conclusions, it was Tia Emilia Claveria, who was an illiterate Roma grandmother who was involved throughout the research project, throughout the 3 years research project, from the very beginning, the design and the end. So she was the one explaining the results in front of an audience full of MEPs, members of the European Parliament and other parliament policymakers from different member states. This conference led to the European Parliament in 2005 to recognize, to promote a resolution that many of us know, recognizing that the Roma were one of the an ethnic minority, a European minority within the Union. The same year was also a resolution was passed. Actually, the person who was next to Tia Emilia in the picture I show was a member of the Spanish Parliament, and he committed in front of the audience to bring this resolution to the Spanish Congress, and he did, and it passed this official recognition of the Roma within the Spanish state. This led to different policies. One of them was the comprehensive plan of the Roma people of Catalonia, that some of you might have read about it, and this would be one of the successful examples I wanted to mention, because I don't have time to have to go in depth to it, but I invite you all to look at it. And it has some of the elements that I will be presenting as key for this research to overcome this exclusionary research, but also to promote this research that is developed with the Roma community, but also mostly important is has social impact. So it contributes to address the main issues, the main problems that the most part of the Roma community throughout the world is suffering. So the comprehensive plan of the Roma people of Catalonia, there is a lot of publications. It's already in English. I'm just mentioning here this scientific publication that is an assessment of the social impact, particularly on their policy on accessing to higher education, as Margaret and the EduCig project is highlighting the importance of promoting the access to higher education, and which are the measures and the policies that make this possible. You have to think that in Catalonia, because the plan is operating within Catalonia, the region of Catalonia within the Spanish state, we could count before the comprehensive plan for the Roma people, we could count the Roma people at the university with the 2 hands. And it goes enough. You don't need more fingers to count the Roma people who have access to higher education. And now there is already a network, Campus Rome, Solidarity Network, who is operating, and that I invite you to Google it and to do more research, but is also mentioned in this article published in the International Journal of Roma Studies. So, which is the secret of this type of research that leads to this social impact? Basically, one of the main issues is this communicative methodology, this dialogic co-creation of knowledge that has been already discussed today in the different presentations. And the communicative methodology has these 2 parts, not only the participation of the subjects whose reality is studied, but also of course the live world in terms of Habermas, or the agency is considered, but also what we know from research. So all those type of research and knowledge that has been accumulated within the scientific community is brought into dialogue with what the subjects and the persons, and in this case the Roma community, who is the one experiencing firsthand this reality, knows about it. So the knowledge is the result of this dialogue of these two parts. Yeah. So this communicative methodology goes from hoax to evidences, because you have the knowledge is created in dialogue with these communities. It is very important the participation of Roma in different ways. The advisory councils is one way. The promotion of affirmative action policies for Roma researchers to be part in equal footing of the research teams is another policy, and this is also two of the features of the comprehensive Roma plan. So there are Roma people working within the plan, and they also have an advisory board working with them, who is monitoring and advising the policymakers all throughout the process. But also two other elements are very important, and it's this idea of moving from the language of critique to the language of possibility. This is also very Freirean. Paulo Freire has also been mentioned today, and I think that this is also very important, because for many, what we found in our research is that for many Roma families and Roma people, they know which are the challenges and the problems that they are facing. What they don't know, and what they don't, most part of the time, they don't know how to overcome or how to address this, or they don't have the resources or the equipment to address them. So this is in the way in which academia and policymakers, in collaboration and in dialogue with these communities, we can bring in this knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, and this is an example of an advisory board. Researchers, people from the NGOs, different, the civil society, the Roma civil society is organized in different ways in different countries. But for instance, in Spain, this is an example of research, of an advisory committee of a research I conducted on Roma, on gender violence among Roma communities. And we included all these different representatives of NGOs, of Roma organizations, Roma women organizations, who were already working on Roma, on gender violence in the field, but also policymakers, people from the Evangelist Church, which is a really important role, and I see that in EduCig is also involved, etc. So these advisory boards can also play a key role in this monitoring and this following up of the research. But also in research, and this is not something that we say it from academia, but every time more cultural groups are asking and requesting and are complaining about the old practices and traditional practices of going to the communities, collecting the data and forgetting about this, and they even don't know why is this data for, or where is it going to be published, or why is it going to be used, their personal data, or even very private stories that they generously share. So every time there is this claim, and this is not specific from the Roma community, but it's specifically for, I would say it's a trend, it's a global trend that citizens are asking every time to be more involved in the co-creation process. And this is how this is also been recognized by the European Commission now. 20 years ago, we were already working with the communicative methodology and doing this type of things, but now it's nearly compulsory. I mean, it's one of the items and one of the evaluating the assessment criteria that is most valued. You cannot develop this type of research in Horizon 2020 without involving and engaging in this co-creation process. Yeah. This is part of this global trend of open access, and also to respond to the idea of hold on, because here I miss it might be hidden. But the idea that every citizen has the right to benefit from science. So the citizenship and society in general has the right to participate in the science, the scientific knowledge production, and also to be benefited from it. This is part of an overall trend that I think that there is no return point. So we are all pushed to this new scenario, and Romani studies cannot be an exception, but it's also part of this changing trend. Yeah, but co-create together, and together for what? Yeah, so the idea of public sociology that was launched in the 2004 by Michael Burawoy when he was the president of the American Sociological Association was very key in pointing out that this knowledge that we are producing should be oriented to address these burning issues of the communities. Actually, in a conference, Federico Mayor Zaragoza, in a conference dedicated to poverty in 2010 that was organized by the EU Spanish presidency in Segovia, he said in the closing ceremony that he would never attend to another conference on poverty that was based on diagnosis of the problems, because the best diagnosis is autopsy, but it comes too late. Yeah. So what society and what citizens and also what the Roma families need is evidence-based solutions, how to address these problems, how to address this and what works. And we already from science and from the scientific community, we have a lot of knowledge and experiences about what works and what doesn't work. So it's time to bring in this knowledge and these experiences into the communities. Yeah. So the communicative methodology is not only oriented then to involve in this dialogue, but also oriented in this dialogue these subjects, but also to orient to identify the barriers, but not only the barriers, but also the opportunities in dialogue with these communities, because most part of the time, the solutions and good works would emerge from this dialogue from science and these subjects. Yeah, another example that has been very much working not exclusively, but in many parts of Europe with Romani communities is the Included project that was funded under the CIES framework program, and basically was meant to identify what works and what doesn't work in education, and it came up with a list of successful educational actions that are being implemented in many countries, among them Portugal. I will mention a little bit in a minute. Included was selected by the European Commission as the only project under the CIES framework program as a success story, the only project on social science and humanities, as a success story for the social impact that it produced. At the moment, the successful educational actions are being implemented in more than 9,000 centers, formal and non-formal education, and all these successful educational actions have been included in the European Toolkit of Schools, which is part of the portal of the European Commission. And even the Portuguese government has taken these successful educational actions as part of the Included project to implement in more than 50 agrupamientos. Many of them have been already mentioned here by the EduCig presentation. So all this is telling us the importance of not only including the voices, but also to orient our research to social impact, to address the burning issues, and to produce and to do this step beyond to this participation, but also to orient the creation of knowledge to solutions, to address this type of solutions. Already there are many examples here, only some of the career network that have been developed, but there are many others that are already oriented, because it's also the European Commission is not only asking all the research community to engage in co-creation processes, but also in achieving social impact. We have to explain how all the funds that we are receiving are going to contribute to address the impacts that they are pointing out. These are just some examples of how this communicative methodology have helped to achieve this social impact in different areas, and many of them tackling Roma community. just to finish, because I'm reaching out the time, I just want to share another example of successful successful example of social inclusion that has been published also in different journals. Different research has been conducted on the example of the Roma Association of Women Drom Cotarme Stipen, that was actually the first Roma women. I'm having some trouble with my slides, sorry. It was the first Romani Women Association created in Catalonia in 1999. Actually, the founder was Tia Emilia, the one that I mentioned that was presenting in the European Parliament. Mainly the main goal is to struggle for the equality and the non-discrimination of Romani women. It's composed by Roma and non-Roma women. This has been one of the features because it is believed that it would be this alliance that will make more progress. And basically, it's oriented to work with grassroots women. There has been different conferences that have been organized, bringing in more than 300 women, grassroots women, not the ones that are normally representing their communities, but women who had never taken a plane. So they flew to Barcelona and they organized two conferences to discuss with and engage with this model of the communicative methodology with these women. Yeah, there are many publications. Actually, in 2009, it was awarded with the Gold Award for the best Grunbeck project, also to produce project producing some educational materials for adult education centers on the Roma culture and the Roma history. And the main activities is these encounters, these trobades, how we say it in Catalan. It's basically meetings, social gatherings of Roma women that have been going on for 20 years now, and that is a place to discuss, and it's very much organized from these grassroots women communities in different places. Normally it is organized in a Roman neighborhood, but it's a way, and from the organization of these gatherings, many Romani women organizations have been created in these different parts of Catalonia, but also in Spain. And it's a way to generate more capacity building in these communities, because then these organizations are created. And this was the origin of these conferences that I have mentioned. Here you can see some of the pictures of these intergenerational encounters, in which there is always a round table of role models of women from all ages, not only children, but also elder women who have, for instance, who have learned how to read and write. I remember the first conference in Barcelona that Portuguese women, Portuguese Roma women who lives in Barcelona, explained, and she dreamed to write a book, you know, because she has just learned how to read and write and she was 70. Yeah, so this is the type of narrative that is a way of empowering and also creating this capacity building within the communities, as well as developing these solidarity networks that have proved to be so important in research. And COVID didn't stop Drom Cotarme Stipen, so the gatherings went online, and we had two sessions online. And just to finish, when the Drom Cotarme Stipen organized the second conference, International Conference of Romani Women, it came up in many different media headlines, and a new was published in this newspaper that is published every day, which is called the feminist newspaper, Diario Feminista. And the headlines, we really like these headlines because it says, "No hay quien nos pare," no one would stop us, mentioning this transformative move that we observe within this Roma women movement, and that I wanted to share with you as an example of these successful Roma social inclusion examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. It was also very interesting because we hear about the communicative methodology and about successful projects and initiatives that you are involved with. So now maybe we can open the session for questions and for comments and answers in English, of course, or in Spanish. As if you want, Teresa, to answer in Spanish, I think the Portuguese will appreciate a lot, but of course, English, it's okay also. Então, questões queiram colocar em inglês ou eventualmente em espanhol para a Teresa. Em português, penso que a Teresa também pode eventualmente tentar compreender, nós podemos ajudar, mas também não queríamos excluir aqui no debate a professora Margaret, como é óbvio. Colegas do projeto, meus colegas, que estão aqui presentes também, e a apelar para que colocassem questões, que fizessem comentários. Eu posso começar por fazer uma questão assim, acho que é melhor. The first question for the Teresa and for Margaret, for both. So, in your opinion, for instance, we have some difficulties in the access to the political institutions and the political representatives. Sometimes we have huge difficulties in the access because we want to improve some social policies or some social measures, or we want to intervene in some gaps that exist in Portugal about some issues related with education or with training or the employment in relation to the Roma or Ciganos. And we have some difficulties in the access, and sometimes, of course, they hear our opinions and they listen us, but the difficulty is the other phases, or what we can do in order to, or what you can recommend in order to have our work more impact, or I don't know, more audience among the politicians and among the people that design social policies, or have the capacity of decision in these different social areas, because we have huge difficulties. It's easy to involve them in this kind of initiatives like seminaries and workshops and so on, and meetings, but the problem is to have more efficacy in our results when the results are appropriated by the political sphere, or the sphere that make decisions or take decisions about Roma and Ciganos people. I don't know if it's very clear. Today I'm very confused. So I'm sorry.
Did you want to go first, Teresa, or should I have a comment?
Wherever you want, you can start and I will.
Okay, thank you. I think from my point of view, I've been fortunate because I was a professional policy officer and a lawyer before I became an academic. So my cat's walking across the screen, hopefully won't cut us all off. So I therefore had networks and contacts to start with. But I agree, it can be very difficult sometimes. People will come and speak, but then how do you bring about meaningful change? And as obviously you'll be aware, we've gone through Brexit. We have a perhaps I shouldn't say this, a very populist government at the moment who are actually trying to bring in some policies which are threatening to nomadic, particularly gypsy and traveller people. So there's different ways of working, I find, and it's very much, as a policy person, it's very much what is the right point at this time. So sometimes it's engaging with EU initiatives, a bit harder now with through Brexit, but then we can work with the NGOs who have the voice perhaps of local politicians and also funders, because that's quite important. If you can get media to pick up on stories and narratives and issues, that's obviously creates pressure on both local politicians and central politicians. I find working with policy professionals, so the officials who then provide information to politicians, can also be quite an effective way of getting narratives onto the table. But we're in quite a challenging situation at the moment in the UK, so we're working at grassroots and then feeding that through our political links and committed individuals. Those of you who are still within the EU, lucky you, can hopefully have a slightly different type of leverage. Teresa.
Well, I think that additionally to what Margaret said, I think that from our experience, one of the key, I mean, sometimes the issue that you Manuela raised, I think it's crucial, because that's one of the questions that we are asked many times, especially by people who do research and who want our research to be useful and to have social impact, right? So the first step to achieve social impact is to have a policymaker or an NGO or a body who can implement that knowledge to be interested, right? So from our experience, when we have achieved that a government or a policymaker, our experience is when they see that there are already evidences of social impact. So when you bring in, I remember that in one of the included conferences in the European Parliament, we had an 11-year-old explaining how had a school change, because they were doing interactive groups and literary dialogic gatherings in her class. Yeah, so she was the one explaining it, the impact, the benefits. Yeah, we had also a Roma member of the community explaining how his life changed from being to prison to being volunteer in the school of his children. Yeah. And I remember that in the audience there were MEPs and policymakers from very different political parties, very political parties. And what they all like, because policymakers, no matter, I mean, we collaborate with many different political parties in different countries in the world. And what we see them in common is that normally what they want is to address and to seek for solutions. So when you offer not only the theory, but already that this theory is already being implemented and that there are already evidences of these benefits, and it's not the researcher who is explaining it, but the testimonies, then this makes it a good formula to achieve this type of social impact. And I remember that in this conference that there was this 11-year-old, an MEP raised his hand from Malta, and he said, you are giving us everything, the whole pack, because you bring the research, you bring the policy, and you already bring the results of this policy. Yeah, so I think that this is one formula that has been successful from us. Yeah, and of course, with this this formula, you need the participation of the subject. You need to engage in this co-creation process, because otherwise you cannot invite these people to participate and also to evaluate the social impact. So it's not only something that researchers do, but it's a dialogic process to see the benefits and to see the impact in these communities.
Can I just come in there, because you've triggered another thought there as well, Teresa. So one of the other things too is the value of having the sort of networks we've spoken about, is there's also a real flood of evidence, so that we're able then to sort of bring together that weight. It's not just one researcher, one university saying it. It's the co-production, but there might be 10, 12 voices. And of course, responding to every consultation or call for evidence. So what we've done, for example, is the call which closes next week on barriers to education for Roma people. we've got not only individual responses going in, we have community members who are graduates who are responding, a lot of the charities and organisations, but we're also seeing clusters through our network, for example, where there's NGOs working with universities to jointly put in consultation responses. So I'll strongly encourage that. That seems to be effective in getting policy officials to come back and say, right, let's invite you to come and speak to, policy makers, officials, networks within ministries to talk about this work.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa and Margaret, for your examples and recommendations, because you have a huge experience in relation to the question that I put. But now maybe we can have other questions and comments for the participants in this session. Não sei se há questões ou dúvidas, comentários. Se querem fazer alguma partilha também de experiências. Maybe not. Ok. Eu tinha aqui mais uma pergunta, peço desculpa por mais uma questão que tem a ver precisamente com as apresentações. The last question for me is about how, okay, we involve in different phases, and trying here to make some connection between your presentations and our project. We try in different phases to involve different persons from the Roma or Ciganos community, but the question is, of course, and we didn't have, of course, a result about this, the process of appropriation of the project. So I don't know yet how this project and the results could be appropriated by the people that are involved in the project, but in your experience, the process of appropriation is, of course, during the project and after the project, of course, because we have now some amounts that we could work in a better way our results, and we can use strategies of communication among the persons from the Roma or Ciganos community. But based in your experience, I think that it's very important to use more close strategies of communication, and it's very important to use in the process of communication some examples and some interventions of people that were involved in the project. I suppose in order to diffuse their experience and their perception about the project among other Roma or Ciganos persons. I don't know if my question is perceptible. So the process of communication, because normally we researchers, we try to diffuse the results among the academic institution, and our language is very academic, and sometimes we must change our process of communication, as you said, and our type of language. And maybe more important is the process of appropriation of the results by the communities or by the persons that are from Roma or Ciganos origin. And maybe, for instance, our our documentary is important output, but of course we must have other communicative strategies in order to enlarge the audience of the results among the Roma people or Ciganos also. So the questions are very connected, so sorry for my focus. Margaret.
Hi, sorry, I keep speaking, so I hope I'm not coming in before Teresa, if she wanted to first. Yeah, I think it's absolutely important that we do use a range of methodologies. So in our practice, we might use video, we have community members themselves who will actually translate that knowledge, because for many years, I don't think I've been involved in a research project with the communities, probably for about 14 years, that doesn't actually have community co-researchers. So we actually involve them very much in disseminating the knowledge. We also share the analysis. We ask people to culturally interpret. Now, the project that we completed last year about barriers to education within a particular region, although it's got a national sort of relevance, but it was focused regionally, which has created a whole network with local authorities, municipalities working with people. We had cartoonists, so who were doing like graphic design, who were taking the narratives of the young people, the children, about their experiences, and using that to actually draw images. And those images are going into the report, which will be out quite soon. And we've used those images, we've showed them in events, and people go, yeah, I get that. Maybe I don't understand the language, but I can see very clearly through this visual representation. So cartoons, videos, we've used photography. I mean, many people use photo voice, obviously, that's a very common technique. Recording, we tend to do results, we use a simplified language, so there are tools, for example, on Word to look at reading age, and then obviously translating into community languages. So we're constantly looking at new methodologies for dissemination, and then again we go back to the community and say what would be the most effective, and we hear some wonderful ideas from people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, I could only add, I totally agree. I think that citizens and Roma are not an exception, can not only contribute, are already contributing to co-create knowledge, but also to disseminate the social impact, evidences of social impact. Actually, we had work on identifying how citizens and how even Roma organizations, we are working with the Spanish ministry in a book, in a publication on how to overcome the barriers of scientific dissemination, scientific communication, how research is brought to the communities, but they are not only recipients of this communication, or they are not only co-creators of this knowledge, but they are also participating in the dissemination of these evidences. And this is very much shown in social media, for instance. So I think that all these means are of crucial importance.
Thank you very much for your experience, that are very interesting. We can learn a lot about this process of communication, new methodologies of communication, of the research results. So I don't know if we have more questions or comments. Se não tivermos mais comentários, poderemos eventualmente finalizar por aqui, e amanhã voltaremos a ter uma nova sessão logo pelas 9h30 da manhã. Talvez já seja muito tarde. Okay, so I think we haven't more questions, so thank you very much for your participation, Teresa and Margaret, and obrigado a todos também por terem estado presentes até esta hora. Desculpem o atraso, amanhã vamos tentar ser, obviamente, mais pontuais e controlar melhor os tempos, mas muito obrigada e até amanhã. Obrigada. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Muchas gracias. Adiós.
Adiós, Teresa.
Thank you, Margaret.
Obrigada, Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was just putting in the chat, I really appreciate being invited, and I'm sorry I won't be with you tomorrow, but please get in touch if I can be of any help.
Okay, thank you.